Welcome back for match number 2. We are on the draw, and it looks like we are facing a Yorion mirror, or our opponent just decided to play 80 cards. Not sure which is more likely. Alright, this hand seems solid. Getting an early mana advantage with Growth Spirals seems good in any Yorion mirror. It could be we're up against the Scape Shift deck. We could be up against a mirror. I can't really tell you yet, but we will see. Abundant Growth. I know most versions of the Reclamation deck aren't playing Abundant Growth, which makes me think that it's probably not a mirror. And it's more likely this is the Scape Shift deck. Haven't played that matchup yet, but I assume that it's pretty close. We have a lot of permission, so do they. Reclamation gives us a huge advantage, but the threat of Scape Shift does give them a bit of an advantage as well. Do I feel a need to opt now? I think because we have 2 ops, it's probably smart to fire one off. And let's get a breeding pool because we are likely to Growth Spiral. I'll take another Growth Spiral. I think, like I said, I think that card's very strong in the mirror matches of Yorion decks. Just a free cantrip, play an extra land. Gives you a better chance of converting cards like Cryptic Command to be 2-for-1s. And you generally want to hit land drops in these mirrors anyways, so being able to hit them early is pretty big. It's effectively like taking back the play if you're on the draw. If this resolves, we're probably going to play Misty Rainforest and get the Triome. There is value to holding your fetches in this deck because they fetch Mystic Sanctuary, but I also want to just have my mana set up. Our opponent goes for a hard cast Force of Negation. That's okay. We're going to play a land. Force of Negation, one of the better cards in the mirrors. I'm trying to remember. I don't believe that the Scape Shift deck plays Force of Negation. So they also don't play Hollowed Fountain, to be fair. So I don't think this is Scape Shift. I think this might just be Bant Yorion control, which should be a pretty good matchup for us. Growth Spiral resolves this time. We'll go ahead and fetch the Triome, and then we'll opt. Lands are good, but we already have a couple of them, and I wouldn't be surprised if we draw more, so we'll put one on the bottom. Draws Uro. I'm not going to get too aggressive and jam Uro here, because I would prefer to have at least one counter spell up after jamming Uro, and currently we would only have 3 mana. Ice Venkotl is okay. Not sure if our opponent is genuinely wondering about our deck or if they're just fishing to see if they can get more information about what we're playing, but I think the Triome is a pretty big giveaway of what deck we're playing anyways, so it's probably just a genuine question. What do we want to do here? So we could start by Growth Spiraling, which would give us a mana advantage, and we can still cast Factor Fiction. But we would, if we wanted to, if we don't draw another land, have to put in Mystic Sanctuary for not very much value. We could go ahead and put like an opt on top, but that's not even that good. We could also just cast the Factor of Fiction. I think the Growth Spiral is worth it. Being mana efficient with these cantrips is pretty important. So we'll Growth Spiral, put in the Mystic Sanctuary, put Opt on top. With the trigger on the stack, let's cast Factor Fiction. This is a pretty mandatory must counter for our opponent. And they will Force of Negation it. We are not going to put Opt on top of our deck. Because we are going to Uro next turn and we want as many looks as possible to hit another land so that we have Cryptic up. But even if we don't, we will have Remand plus Fatal Push. So we're pretty well set on that front anyways. Trophy, not a bad one. Not a bad one. Gives us more answers to a Planeswalker if they're able to push one through. So that's pretty solid. We're going to wait till end step to push this Icefang Codal as representing something like Archmage's Charm is probably more valuable than the 1 damage. Our opponent goes for Yorion. Let's remand it. I mean, so here it's not really going to get a ton of value, and we could just cleanly trophy it, but I think that this remand is still pretty good value, getting basically net 3 mana for it and letting us cantrip. Then we'll go ahead and just push this Icefang Codal now. There is some value to not pushing the Icefang Codal as to like give our opponent a false perception of how much value they would be getting, if you see what I mean. Basically what I mean there is if our opponent thinks that resolving Yorion means they're going to get to blink Abundant Growth and an Icefang Codal, then they're more likely to try to cast that Yorion. But even Yorion alone, blinking just Abundant Growth, is probably too much value for us to not want to counter, especially because we have Cryptic Command. So there's not really a lot of value in that spot, but in some points you could want to deceive your opponent and let them keep the creature thinking that they're getting more value than they are. Our opponent goes for Yorion. We're going to fire off this Cryptic, counter draw. Definitely aggressive from our opponent. So with Astrolabe as our draw for turn, we're not going to fetch a Mystic Sanctuary yet. We'll take a draw step, and then we can fetch Mystic Sanctuary while still being able to play the Astrolabe. That lets us get extra information before deciding what we want to put on top. We'll put Cryptic on top, which will make it hard for our opponent to cast anything. There's an argument for Remand, but I think our turn is pretty well scripted next turn, where we go Codal plus one of our 4 mana spells, either Cryptic counter their spell or Factor Fiction plus Codal. Remand would help us protect our Factor Fiction, and remanding your own spell is something that actually happens pretty often in control mirrors like this, as the remand cantrips and you fizzle their counterspell effectively by removing yours from the stack and bringing it back to your hand. So we will fire off this Factor Fiction. I think we're going to jam our Yorion if they... Okay, they have a Force of Negation, so they still have Cryptic up. We have an Uro we could bring back. That's probably our best play. Let's go ahead and go for that. We'll remove lands from our graveyard first, and then we'll start removing the most useless spells. So we'll go Opt first as we have a duplicate. Fatal Push doesn't have a ton of use, especially with Trophy in our hand, but we only have one of them. Getting a bit Uro flooded here. Charm draw 2. Strong play on the end step of your opponent's turn, but generally I think it's just safer not to counter it. Path to Exile will happily take another land for this Uro. Just get an island. Don't really need more forests. Batterskull. So our opponent's playing a Stoneforge deck. Batterskull's fine. We'll probably just end up trophying it, as it is a bit of an annoyance long term. We have to pick a spot, though, where we go for the Assassin's Trophy. We know our opponent has Force of Negation in hand. Okay. We'll draw. I was considering if I wanted to put Remand on top, but I think I'd rather wait. We draw the extra Mystic Sanctuary. Pretty awkward. Didn't want to draw that. So if we trophied the Batterskull now, they could just return it to their hand, which means it wouldn't do anything. We could jam a Yorion here. We know our opponent's hand is Force of Negation and 2 unknowns, so they could have Archmage's Charm. That also taps us out pretty low. I think I'm going to go for bringing back Uro instead here. Uro basically brick walls our opponent, their Batterskull. So it demands an answer. It can't be Force of Negation, and if they cryptic it, then we'll just go ahead and, or they can't cryptic it, but if they counter it, I mean, we can go ahead and trophy their Batterskull. I'll put Remand on top this time. I think Remand's gaining a little bit more value. If we foresee our opponent maybe bouncing their Batterskull to their hand and then replaying it, then Remand gains more value. We still have our Yorion and our opponent doesn't, which is an advantage for us. Sword of Fire and Ice. That's a scary one. That's a scary one. Yeah. Looks pretty likely to connect as well. We'll go for the trophy on Batterskull. But, oops, that's not what we wanted to do. So we'll go for the trophy on Batterskull. We are representing something, but if they do fire off a Force Negation here, there's not much we can do. They will get to connect once, kill our Icefang Codal, at least. It may not be the end of the world, as we're going to have double Cryptic with Uro, but Batterskull does have Lifelink and Vigilance, so Uro can't actually attack unless we tap down the Batterskull. We can bounce. Let's see, what can we do? So we could attack if they block. We bounce sort of Fire and Ice to their hand, and they lose the Germ as well. I think that seems pretty good. If they don't block, then we can just start fogging them. Ooh, Wilderness Wreck is a very good draw. They do block, so let's go ahead, return target permanent to its owner's hand, draw a card. That alleviates some of the pressure off of us. That must be countered. The question is, do we want to go with lead with Cryptic Command or do we want to lead with Remand? So right now we have access to 6, 10, 12 mana. So if we lead with Cryptic Command, counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand. So we're going to start bouncing our Mystic Sanctuaries instead of drawing, and that's because we have a lot of card draw with Uro, but Mystic Sanctuary being able to loop the Cryptics is super valuable. Our opponent is for Abundant Growth. That is okay. They have Field of Ruin. That's very strong at disrupting our Mystic Sanctuary loops. Sword is okay. We just have to stop the creature. Let's get Cryptic back now while they're tapped out, or while they can't activate Field of Ruin. I think it's a bit of an oversight on their part to allow that to happen. We just have to be careful not to bounce our Mystic Sanctuary in a spot where they can just Field of Ruin it. We'll go ahead and jam Yorion. We have the Wilderness Wreck in play, so we'll just get to get an extra threat down and draw a card. This does play a little bit heavier into Supreme Verdict if they have that, but it's not the end of the world. Yorion replaces itself, and we can just bring back Uro, so I don't think Supreme Verdict should be a reason not to play Yorion here. Our opponent might think we have 4 Mystic Sanctuary, because Autumn Burchett's list ran 3 or 4 Mystic Sanctuary, so we could consider bouncing our own Yorion here. Let's do that. We still have multiple counter spells up between Snapcaster Mage and Remand, so I feel pretty safe. Stoneforge Mystic. I mean, I think they've already gotten most of their equipments, but just any creature is a little bit annoying, and I think that we are just going to try to close this game out as quickly as possible. So let's just go ahead and snap Cryptic. We'll go counter target spell, bounce Mystic Sanctuary. Ice Fang Codal, we can remand that. Drown in the Lock's a great draw. Yeah, so obviously we're not getting like max value off of Remanding and Ice Fang Codal, but they can't replay it. So that's one thing. And they have a lot of lands, so there aren't very many spells they couldn't replay right away anyways. As well as the fact that we know we're going to be getting back a Cryptic Command. So we basically know that we're going to have 2 counterspells between Snapcaster Mage and Yorion. And what that means, in my mind at least, is that we should pretty aggressively just keep any threat off of the table for that one turn because they have the ability to suit it up with Batterskull and Sword of Fire and Ice. So let's go ahead and Yorion. We can blink Snapcaster Mage to recast Growth Spiral for some extra value, just a one mana redraw. So at end step. Oh, oops, no. Hold on, let's turn off auto yields. Definitely don't want to be yielding through the Reclamation trigger. We'll just float some mana. Untap. Cast Growth Spiral. Good thing we floated mana. We can cast Factor Fiction. We're at 12 minutes on clock. Okay, so our opponent pretty much knows they're very dead here, but they're just going to play on to try to make us run down our clock more. So I'm going to start playing a bit faster. So sorry if I don't commentate as well, but don't want to time out. And we are down a pretty significant amount. So just counter draw. We know their last card is Codal. Counterbounce, because our opponent keeps tapping down their Field of Ruin. We will take it. And then we'll F6. Sure, they return Batterskull. That's fine. We'll just counter it on the way down. Let's go ahead and bring back Uro, put them on a 2-turn clock. Doesn't matter what we exile here, they're just very dead, no matter what. We'll Mystic Sanctuary, put Cryptic on top. Attack. So they could draw exactly Supreme Verdict here. That'd be a bit annoying. Counter target spell. Remand. All right. We take game 1. Game 2, we'll bring in the Veil of Summers. We'll bring in a Mystical Dispute. I'm usually interested in like a Aether Gust because Uro can be pretty annoying. So just being able to like have an efficient, clean answer to that is pretty nice. We could bring in a Collective Brutality if we have more cards we're interested in cutting. Pulsum Ross is not the worst. What are we interested in cutting? At least 3 push. We could cut the full 4, but then we're very light on answers to resolved threats. We know they have Stoneforge, so honestly, we probably want to keep 2 push. So cards that we don't need as much, I think, are these. So we'll bring in this, and the question is, what do we cut? I think cutting 1 Cryptic is reasonable. Cutting 1 Uro is reasonable. Uro, the games go late, so you're likely to see a lot of them. Cryptic, not as effective when your opponent has Mystical Dispute and Veil of Summer. So I don't like having those as much, and I prefer to have some amount of disruption. Let's actually bring in the Collective Brutality, though, because I think that it kills Stoneforge Mystic on turn 2, and it can duress the opponent. So we need one more cut, and let's go ahead and cut. Could be another Cryptic. Could be an Ice Fang. I actually like Ice Fang just as an early cantrip. And if one player is able to like snowball Ice Fangs, it can get kind of out of control in like these control mirrors. If everyone's just holding up counter magic and then just plays a couple Ice Fangs, you're starting to hit them for 3 a turn. They have to like path an Ice Fang Codal, which is just a huge win for you. So I don't like cutting them unless you have really good cards. Okay, we'll cut one more Cryptic. It could have been like Mystical Teachings just because you know that Wilderness Reclamation is unlikely to resolve, but I think like end step Mystical Teachings is pretty strong. Opponent's end step, obviously. So we will run this back. Our hand has a bunch of uncastable spells. And I'm not even really sure how strong they are. We'll keep. Our opponent has the Stoneforge Mystic. We have Decay, so we are set. See what they get. Sword of Feast and Famine. Really good card for the opponent. Let's go ahead and fire off this Decay now. Don't want to risk it. Obviously, we are giving our opponent a spot to jam Teferi. If they have Teferi plus Force Negation backup for our Assassin's Trophy, that could be bad. So maybe that was a reason not to do that. Looks like they do have Teferi. Yikes. We'll see if we're in trouble here. Opponent has 4 unknowns. Never a big fan of being on the back foot in spots like these. This trophy is somewhat awkward because it ramps our opponent to land. But cleanly answering Teferi is pretty important. So I'll take it. Play an island here. Can't cast Drown in the Loch twice because we have a snow-covered forest in play anyways. Opponent has a Quaddle. That's okay. If they play the sword and try to equip it, then we can Drown and lock the Quaddle, and they do get a 2-for-1, but we get a pretty big mana advantage, so it's not as bad as it seems. We could also try to counter the sword. Maybe that's just better. Considering we already used our trophy and our decay. We should probably just counter the sword here. Yikes, they have the Veil of Summer and they can equip it. That's really bad. Yeah, that's pretty horrendous for us. And we don't really have, it gets pro black-green, so we can never block it with our own coddles. How do we get out of this? We'll pitch. The question is, what can we teachings for? Push doesn't work. We can teachings for a Snapcaster Mage. We can, next turn we can fetch Mystic Sanctuary and put Decay on top. Let's get rid of Nexus of Fate. Push a little too late. Our opponent's really burying us here. Are they getting back a Veil of Summer? Archmage's Charm. Our opponent will be pretty incentivized to counter those mystical teachings. Hopefully it's not a Force of Negation. Dovin's Veto, that's fine. We'll go ahead and fetch up a Mystic Sanctuary. By no means are we in a good spot here, but we are not dead, at least. Go ahead and decay. Never mind, we are dead. They had the Veil of Summer. I'd rather conserve clock than try to play out this game that's very likely over. So that's what we will do. All right, we can run this back. All right, very solid hand. Just a bunch of early game cantrips. Ice Fang and Astrolabe make our Yorion especially threatening, which makes it harder for our opponent to tap out when they know we can follow up with Yorion and just draw a bunch of cards. So I'm a big fan of this hand overall. Our opponent also starts with the best card in Modern, Arkham's Astrolabe. We'll stick to islands. I may shock a breeding pool next time, but definitely don't want to get a forest or anything like that there. Our opponent mana leaks our Coddle. That's okay. We're going to play Uro pretty aggressively here. Ooh, interesting. Okay. Does that cause us to reconsider? No, I don't think so. I think I'm going to fetch shock a breeding pool here and just jam Uro. It's pretty likely we're able to bring it back next turn, which is why I'm tempted to jam it there. We can even threaten Veil of Summer. Our opponent going for a tapped land. Interesting what they could have. Oops. We don't have enough cards to bring back Uro now. Okay, so we can Growth Spiral and then bring back Uro. A bit of a mistake on my part. I'm trying to play fast because I don't want to clock. But no need to get too hasty. We'll just get an island. Green. This is an aggressive line from us, for sure. but I think it's not a bad one necessarily. It looks like our opponent's having mana issues. I'd be surprised if they had a second mana leak. We'll put in this polluted delta and just pass. Oh, they do have a path. Okay. I mean, we weren't going to be able to protect from that anyways. At least we get a land from the deal. Our opponent has to ferry. We'll see if they minus this time. They do minus, going for the astrolabe value. See if they have another basic. They do. That's pretty good for our opponent. We're gonna... what are we gonna do here? We're gonna have to play pretty aggressively against this. I mean, hopefully we draw something good, but assuming our draw is anemic or not great, we are going to have to probably just jam Yorion. So if that's the case, okay, Factor Fiction's really good. Let's start with Factor Fiction. We can still play Yorion even if they have a Force of Negation. They do have a Force Negation. That's unfortunate. Let's go ahead and jam Yorion. Wishing we had that Ice Fang Codal sitting around. It's possible we should have just main phased on our turn the Ice Fang Codal to not play into their mana leak, but that's like the only way they punish us. And I still think that holding up Growth Spiral Remand is more valuable. Mystical Teaching is a great draw. They get to get back Force of Negation though, so if they can draw here, they can just force. Oh, opponent can go for their own Yorion. That's right. Well, we weren't sure if they were going to be hitting land drops, but they did. And now they're going to get to draw their... That's really good. Man, yeah, we're in a tough spot here. Not gonna sugarcoat it. All right, let's start with Ice Fang Codal. Draw Decay. Wow, really good draw. Really, really good draw. Just go ahead and Decay right now. Can't Force a Negation that. We'll pass. Well, Mystical Teaching's on their turn, so that if they, like, basically they have to leave up mana or they won't be able to Force a Negation. I actually think I'm not even going to Mystical Teachings here. I'd prefer to force a spot where they can't Force a Negation it. So, get in for one. We could Mystical Teachings, and if our opponent has if their opponent forces, then we can remand. Is that too aggressive? They could have double force. Let's not do that. I think we can wait for a spot. Okay, we draw Drown in the Loch. Another good draw. Do we want to... Maybe we might drown their Yorion on their turn. We're not going to take actions on our turn. I think that's a mistake. No need to play that aggressively. And we're now setting up to force something really big. I believe their deck has a lot less instant speed plays than ours does, which is part of what gives us such a big advantage. We'll definitely just Ether Gust this Ice Fang Codal, delay it for a turn. Our opponent Dovin's vetoes are Ether Gust, really? So this is where we could go for a big Veil turn. Potentially. Let's see. I think that's okay. Do we want to try to counter again? They would basically have to force of negation. They do force. Let's go for Veil of Summer here for the blowout. We'll get Mystic Sanctuary. Let's just put Drown of the Lock on top. Let's see what they Mystic Sanctuary. Mystic Sanctuary Path to Exile, sure. If they want to put that on top, that's okay. Path is fine. We've got choices here. I'm thinking Fact or Fiction might be the best, but we could also go for another Mystical Teachings. Let's go for Fact or Fiction. I think it'll allow us to just bury our opponent in card advantage. We are having to balance closing the game out with playing like correctly, technically here, but Wilderness Wreck was a great draw. We'll just slam the Fact or Fiction. We'll take whichever pile draws us more cards. We just want redraws here to try to find, you know, Uro or whatever. Oh, they just want to give us all the cards. That's a deal. Not going to complain about that. We'll bottom Growth Spiral, shock a Breeding Pool, cast Growth Spiral, draw Dispute. Okay. We'll pass. We'll yield on this Wilderness Wreck trigger for now. Yeah, so it's basically coming down to, can we close the game before they clock us? Because I think that we're pretty favored to win this game otherwise. Uro was the best draw. We'll play a land, fetch. Mystic Sanctuary. Drown in the Lock. Bring back Uro. Just under 2 minutes to go on the clock. It's kind of annoying. Dovin's veto, sure. I guess we'll counter. Mystic Sanctuary. We'll put Drown in the Lock on top. Our opponent has one draw step, but they don't know that we have Remand, so we can just Remand whatever they play, and then Drown in the Locket. Okay, I just play the land. That allows us to get that F6 value. We'll F6. Get in. No, do not put a land into play. Knock our opponent down to 4. They have one draw step. Has to be Supreme Verdict. They can't cast Supreme Verdict. GG's. All right, we got there. Close on the clock, as control mirrors often can be, but we were able to speed up our play a little bit in the post-board games. Notably conceding in game 2, when we could have technically tried to stay in it and hope to draw, 3, maybe 4 perfect cards in a row to draw out of it. Knowing when to concede, especially when you're in, those time crunch spots, can be something that's kind of important with these decks, especially when your opponent is willing to use the clock against you. So I will see you in the third match.